Our next guest is Dorabeth Wolf, and she's another one of Casey and Jewel's children. I guess the only daughter. What? You don't remember her grandfather, is that right?
No, he died in 1936, and I wasn't born until 1938.
Well, tell us about our grandmother.
Well, I called her Good Mama also because I learned that from Jean. But that's all I ever thought about calling her. I can remember fussing with Sybil Eileen because she called her Nanny, and I told her that wasn't true. That wasn't what she was supposed to call her. And also Marjorie Lee would do the same thing. Now Marjorie Lee died when she was sick. She was Uncle Quentin's daughter with appendicitis. But Sybil Eileen and Marjorie Lee and I used to have a lot of fun arguing over what to call Good Mama. But she was very special to all of her grandchildren, and like Jean said, I guess I really was spoiled because I had two brothers that idolized me, and one of them probably wished most of the time I wasn't there, but I won't call any names. Odie G.
Told my position.
Did you ever visit Good Mama when she lived in Sulphur?
As long as I had Mother on my coattail, because Mother never let me out of her sight. I never stayed anywhere without Mother. So I missed a lot of the things that my brothers got to do.
She lived here in Pecan Gap for a good period, right?
Quite a while.
What do you remember about her during those stages?
Well, she enjoyed Pecan Gap. She went to church with us, and I remember every Sunday she had a different hat to wear. And it was always fun, because back then a lot of people wore hats, but she didn't go to church without that hat. But I guess I hadn't been around somebody that wore a hat to church every Sunday. Like, you know, my mother and I would wear one. Mother would wear hats to a funeral or Easter, but Good Mama wore one every Sunday while she lived in Pecan Gap.
Are there any stories you want to tell us about Casey and Jewel? Or any of your brothers, for that matter?
Well, like I said, my two older brothers, well, George Lee, the oldest brother, and Sandra, where is Sandra? Sandra's daddy. He graduated from high school. I was 3 years old, and then he left home. So I really don't have very many stories about him until he and Sandra's mother got married on my birthday when I was 6 years old. And that was special because I'd never had a sister, and I thought that was the best birthday present. And then within a few months on into that year, they gave me my beautiful niece, and that was very special. But they always lived a long way off, but they came home for special occasions, and it's like a dream come true just to get to see Sandra today. And
She
her
still
husband.
lives a long way off.
She sure does, so we don't get to see her very often. But Weldon was a different story. While he was in the service and in the Navy, if he met a girl and got serious, the first thing they had to do was write me a letter. And I was just a little girl, little bitty girl. But he was like that with everybody he met. They had to get acquainted with his little sister. He was always very special. And of course, when he and Thelma got married, they lived close to us for a little while, but then they soon moved to Borger, so that was different. But
when Odie Jean was up here, he was talking about our grandpa Roland farming with horses and mules. But by the time, talking about his grandpa, but by the time I came along, your father didn't have any horses and mules. I remember him being loving John Deere tractors. Can you tell us anything about his tractors?
I loved his tractor. He taught me to drive that tractor when I was 6 years old. I learned how to drive it because he and Gene would pull corn and I could drive the tractor. And I drove from our farm to the gin and pulled a bale of cotton behind that John Deere tractor. Started when I was 6 years old and didn't think anything about it. Now I can remember as I went down the highway, there'd be people sitting on their front porches watching me like I was going to do something drastic, but it was fun. I loved it.
Any other stories about Casey and Jewel?
Well, my dad was very, very generous to me. I don't know how generous he was to other people. I never really thought about it. But I had a car. When I was 14, I got my driver's license and he gave me a car and I drove it to school. And all I had, if I needed gas, I just drove into the service station and said charge it. Daddy just paid for it and I never heard how much it cost or anything. He never asked me. He just paid for it. If I went to the grocery store and said charge it, when he'd go in there they would tell him. I never had a clue whether I spent a lot of money or a little bit of money, but I know he was very generous to me.
Times were quite a bit different back then. We didn't have some of the conveniences, but we sure had a good time, didn't we?
We sure did. I want to say one more thing. I didn't mention Gene. Now, Gene and I might have had words, but the best thing that Gene ever did for me was to marry Pat and have his kids. I idolized my nieces and nephew, and Pat was always wherever I was, so I wouldn't trade that family for anything in the world. And the Roland kids that have your brothers and sisters and their families, I got to live with Pat and Gene for 5 years when I first went to Dallas. And those girls are still my girls. So, yeah, Deborah and Rita paid me to say that.
During that time, Robert got saved.
It was after that time that after I lived with y'all.
You left, and then I married you and him.
Oh yeah, we could just talk all day, couldn't we, Ronnie?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your wedding. Ronnie's standing here making these videotape. Tell us some of the things that happened at your wedding, which was here in the First Baptist Church, right?
Yes, it was. It was July the 1st, 1961, and it was probably the shortest wedding in history simply because it was so hot we couldn't breathe in that church. And so it didn't take Gene, we were his first wedding to perform, and Ronnie and Bill and Lee were in the wedding, and Deborah and Rita were supposed to light the candles, or Ronnie and Deborah were supposed to light. Archie? Archie's. Okay, I was looking at that picture, and what did we decide a while ago that I was wrong about? I guess it was Deborah and Archie, and Ronnie and Lee and Bill were, what'd y'all do?
We're just in the party. Cute little boys.
But anyway, they couldn't get the candles lit, so they finally gave up because that water cooler would keep blowing them out. So it was a fun time, even if it was too hot.
And Deborah started crying, remember that?
Oh, I remember she went in the choir and sat down. That's why Lee or Bill, somebody had to do it for her. But, of course, they thought that I wasn't going to love them anymore because I was getting married to Robert, but they finally found out that I think they learned to love Robert more than they did me. Because everybody loved Robert.